What's up, everyone? Welcome back. Today's the 22nd of August, 2025. While most videos on this channel look at the outside world from my perspective, today's going to be a little bit different as we look into the numerology of a recent event here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin that essentially upended my life, resulting in incredible loss of property and personal belongings. For those of you unaware, on August 10th, a couple weeks ago, Milwaukee was devastated by record-breaking rainfall that led to widespread flooding around several of its surrounding communities, including the one I live in, which is in West Allis. Now, as someone who's been involved in this and struggling to get back on my feet through these floods, I don't really have any idea how much national media coverage this has gotten, but this was indeed a rather large disaster, probably the biggest one that this city has ever seen. So, I'd like to welcome everybody as I do the first live stream on this channel that I've ever done outside of my own house. On the morning of August 10th, my basement wall collapsed due to these floods. My house was surrounded with about 3 feet of water. And currently the house is in the process of being rebuilt. The house itself is safe. It's just a matter of rebuilding the foundation, getting all the basement walls back up. I can't understate how much of a setback this is for me financially. The good news is that it is just a financial setback. I'm okay. My pets are safe. I have a great friend that I met through this work of numerology who has allowed me to stay in his house as long as I need to while the repairs get done. This video, I was going to do it a little bit sooner, but one thing about my channel is that I really don't like talking about myself to the internet very much. This channel is about numerology and my fascination with essentially the cosmic unity that numerology clues us into. But I know that this video is necessary, as to this point anyway, this is probably the worst thing that's ever happened to me. Hopefully it remains that way. But that being said, there were a lot of members of the community who were impacted much more greater than I was. Like I said, although it's a huge setback, I am going to be able to move back into the house, and before long, I'll be right back to where I was as far as doing this work and focusing on that, which is all that's really important to me. Some of my neighbors had to basically instantly sell their house, unable to get rid of the water in it. There's other people in the city who are still living in shelters right now. So all things considered, this could be a lot worse. We'll get into the details of my issue later, but what I want to start off talking about is how this is all happening by the numbers, which should make it a little more easier for myself to ease into this video. Now, it just so happens that as these historic floods happened in Milwaukee, mind you, this was over 1 foot of rain within 6 to 8 hours. This is in a city that averages less than 40 inches of rain per year. So we got essentially a third of our annual rainfall within less than half of a day. Now, they've been calling this a 1 in 1,000 year flood. However, the statistic that supports that says that if 14 inches of rain falls in 3 weeks, it's a 1 in 1,000 year flood. Here we had approximately 14 inches fall in 6 to 8 hours. So, for those of you into statistics, you can quickly surmise that the odds of that occurring are well within the millions to perhaps billions. And I'm not going to talk a lot about geoengineering in this video. I will, however, probably go to the grave believing that this storm was manufactured. Now, the reason I'm not going to talk about geoengineering much is because I don't really understand it. And you're far better off spending your time listening to someone who has a better understanding of it. I can certainly understand something like cloud seeding, sending an airplane into the sky, spraying chemicals that cause rain. But whatever's going on here is much, much more advanced. And I don't understand it. But ultimately, it doesn't really matter whether or not this storm was manufactured. I guess you could say it was either unnatural or perhaps supernatural. But either way, this event occurred by the numbers, and we'll look at the minute-by-minute radar in a little bit. So you can see just how staggering this event was, how unlikely it was, and why all of us were caught off guard by this storm. Before we get into the radar, I want to talk about some of the numerology. Now, what's important to understand about this is that during these floods, the Milwaukee Brewers were in the midst of what would become their franchise record win streak. And if there was anybody less surprised by these floods than me, I'd like to know about it, because back on August 7th, just 3 days before the flooding that destroyed my basement, I talked about a flood riddle that was connected to Milwaukee. In fact, I talked about this earlier, last month, in the aftermath of the Texas floods, which I did a video on. So these two videos are linked down below in the description, where it's me talking about how the Texas floods that killed about 130 people are connected to the Milwaukee Brewers. And then again, 3 days after I last mentioned this, on August 7th, my city of Milwaukee and my home get ravaged by this historic storm that no one has ever seen the likes of before. So let me quick play a clip from this video so you can hear that I was talking about flooding and Milwaukee just before this event. On this year, and yes,
go back.
Chad, I notice everything. No, I kid, but the Brewers also got a player named Andrew Vaughn this year, and for several seasons, Andrew Vaughn was more or less a lackluster hitter on the White Sox. He was pretty decent, but nothing too great. However, now that he's been traded to the Brewers, he's been scorched earth. He's literally like the best hitter in baseball since the trade. And his first game was with Milwaukee was immediately after the Texas floods. Texas Flood was the name of the first studio album by musician Stevie Ray Vaughan, who died in the state of Wisconsin. So right after I do that video on the Texas floods, the Brewers from Wisconsin get a guy named Vaughn, who is now their best hitter. And remember, when Stevie Ray Vaughan died, the Brewers had another player named Greg Vaughn. So Okay, so once again, that was me 3 days before the flood talking about a flood riddle with Milwaukee. And shout out to one of my commenters on this video as well. As he pointed out, the same year that the Brewers got Greg Vaughn, which was 1 year before Stevie Ray Vaughan died in Wisconsin, the movie Major League was released. And that movie features a main character named Ricky Vaughn, played by Charlie Sheen. Of course, the announcer in that video is Bob Uecker. Bob Uecker, the famous Brewers broadcaster and former player, who died at the age of 90 earlier this year. And what are the odds that this all comes together as the Brewers get their franchise record-breaking win streak with their 14th straight win? So as this video goes on, we're going to talk about all of this numerology and how it syncs back to the Brewers. But first, look at how absolutely perfect this date was for a deluge in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Now, of course, on this channel, we focus on the base 4 ciphers, which all begins in the alphabetic order. There is no playing with numbers on this channel. We simply take the order that the alphabet gives us and then reverse and reduce it. The same 4 ciphers that are focused on in every single one of my videos. And look at the gematria of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Again, this flooding started on August 9th, but it wasn't until the morning of August 10th when the floodwaters actually came up in my street. In the standard alphabetic order, Milwaukee, Wisconsin equals 225, which is of course numerically identical to the current year, 2025. 81 in reduction represents the date August 10th or 8/10, but in most parts of the world, that's written as 10/8. A lot like 108, the reverse reduction value of the city. So what are the odds that not only did I see a flood riddle for Milwaukee coming before it happened, but that it manifested on the exact date found in the gematria of the city? But there's actually something even more staggering about this. If you take those 3 numbers that I just pointed out, 225 plus 81 plus 108, you get a sum of 414. 414 is the primary dialing code for the city of Milwaukee. This is the area code in my phone number. I could probably stop the video there, but of course there's a lot more. Now, on the night of the floods, the Milwaukee Brewers were playing the New York Mets, which was the same team the Brewers played in the last game ever broadcasted by Bob Uecker. Now, of course, New York, home to the attacks on 9/11. And in part 2 of this, you will see how the numbers 9/11 connect all of this remarkably well. Now, when the Brewers were playing the Mets on Saturday night, August 9th, as the rains began to fall, they were wearing their City Connect baseball jerseys, where they have a hat that has the digits 414 in it. But of course, no decode is complete without cosmic synchronicity at play. And this is where things get downright bizarre. On the night of August 9th, as the Brewers were playing the Mets, as the rains that caused the flood began to fall in the city of Milwaukee, there was a race going on at Bowman Gray Stadium, which I believe is a quarter-mile track. Might be a half-mile. I think it's a quarter-mile. Anyway, they were hosting a race, and during the race, a driver named Robbie Brewer died. But it wasn't just a crash that led to his death. He suffered a medical emergency, having a heart attack during the race, and then he died. And again, this was literally happening as the rains began in Milwaukee. You'll even notice that this driver was 53 years old. And in reduction, the city of Milwaukee, as I try to type with one hand here, Milwaukee equals 53. 53, for the record, is the 16th prime number. You may have noticed he crashed on lap 16. In the regular Pythagorean reduction cipher, Milwaukee equals 37. The flood in Milwaukee occurred 37 days after the Texas floods that began on July 4th. Again, these were the floods that I explained in my recent videos were connected to the Milwaukee flood riddle. So I don't know how much more precise I need to be for people to wake up to the fact that numerology essentially runs our lives. The degree to which these things are manipulated, look, I'm just a human being like you guys. I only have my own perspective and insight. But I've seen enough to know that there is absolutely an organic element to this. which is something I will expand on in one of the posts as I go. So just to recap, the flood in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on 10/8/2025, which matches the city's Gematria nearly identically, those numbers summing to 414, Milwaukee's area code, which was also a number on the Brewers' hat as the rains began. During the flood, a race car driver named Robbie Brewer dies. And, of course, the baseball team from Milwaukee that this is all synced to, the Milwaukee Brewers. The Brewers played the Mets 205 days after the death of Bob Uecker, whose last game in the booth was against the Mets. That occurred in Game 3 of the National League Wild Card Series playoffs last year. And I did a bunch of work on this and how it was connected to the Mendoza line in baseball. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Mendoza line in baseball is a 200 batting average. And the Mets had a manager named Carlos Mendoza. And he came out in the ninth inning to talk to Jesse Winker, who batted under the Mendoza line for the Brewers in the previous season. Well, after I made that post in October of 2024, we then found out that Bob Uecker passed away in January. And when you look at Bob Uecker, his lifetime batting average was 200, exactly on the Mendoza line. So again, these are riddles I've been following for many months, almost a year now. And who's more familiar with the city of Milwaukee and its numerology than me, a guy who lives there, the guy who operates the Gematrinator website? So it's difficult for me to put into words how staggering this stuff really is. And again, this guy was 90 years old. I know some of you out there probably think he was murdered, but I would ask you, how did they ensure he would stay alive that long to begin with, right? That's the big paradox that the conspiratorial side of Gematria inundates you with. Now, earlier we looked at the Gematria of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and we talked about these three numbers. But you'll notice we skipped this one. 261, the value of Milwaukee, Wisconsin in reverse. Well, if you convert this number to a date, you get the 26th of January, which is the birthday of Brewer legend Bob Uecker. In fact, Uecker died on the 16th of January earlier this year. And in that same reverse cipher, the name Bob Uecker equals 161, like the 16th of January, or 16/1. Appropriately, the name Bob Uecker also matches Milwaukee. See that? 37, 53. This all occurring as a 53-year-old driver named Brewer passes away in the middle of a race? Are you kidding me? And you got to appreciate how they stamped a 119 video length on this, because this driver, Robbie Brewer, died at Bowman Gray Stadium, which equals 119. So I mentioned this duration with Bob Uecker's death to the start of the floods, 205 days. This is important because the word flood equals 25. Why do you think we're seeing so many historic floods all across the nation lately? Gematria seems to hold the answer. Flood equals 25 and 52 in the alphabetic order. Now, in this Brewers game that was played, as the floods were beginning, one of the players of the Mets, Pete Alonso, hit a home run. And this is important because when the Brewers were eliminated from the playoffs in Uecker's last game, it was because of a 3-run home run by Pete Alonso. Well, sure enough, Pete Alonso hits a home run in this game. But it's not just any home run. It tied the Mets franchise record for all-time home runs, tying Darryl Strawberry. It was Pete Alonso's 252nd career home run. And this happened as the flood broke out. Flood, 25-52. But that's not all, because if you look at the name of the driver who died, Robert Robbie Glenn Brewer, as his name is listed, and we know these nicknames are important as well, his name sums to 252. And Pete Alonso, at the home of the Brewers, hits his 252nd home run in this game. The race car driver died 82 days before his birthday. Now, why is this important? Well, the year 82 is the only time the Milwaukee Brewers have played in the World Series. And this is the first time in my life, I was born in the year 85. This is the first time I've seen that the Brewers are ranked number 1 in all of baseball, at the top of the power rankings. The name Bob Uecker equals 82. So does the word flooding in the alphabetic order. Milwaukee Brewers equals 82. And Pete Alonso's full name, Peter Morgan Alonso, also 82. So does the phrase basement flooding. Now, just as an aside, as another bizarre element of synchronicity that I had with this flood, back in 2008, which, by the way, just so happens to be the first time the Brewers made the playoffs in 26 seasons, in 2008, there was another significant flood in Milwaukee, one in which my parents' house took on a lot of water. And as a result, I lost a bunch of possessions I had stored in their basement. So at the time, I was making a lot of music, and the very next song I made after that flood, I called Basement Flooding. That was the name of the song. And I swear I would not make this up because it's so utterly ridiculous. But I had not listened to that song that I made called Basement Flooding. It was at least 6 months, if not a year. And sure enough, August 9th, the day before the floods began, I pulled my old music catalog up and listened to that song called Basement Flooding. And then about 12 hours later, my basement wall collapsed and my entire basement was flooded. Because again, we live in a magical universe where even the most disastrous, worst things that happen to us appear to be some form of destiny. I've been studying this code for 8-9 years now, and I have no question in my mind that we as human beings in this plane are playing out an age of our own spiritual development. And to some degree, that has been scripted by God, by Creator, maybe even by our own true higher selves. And as you will see, my age on this date is connected to the event as well. Just think about it, right? What are the odds of this? The number on my channel name in YouTube is 85 because I was born in the year 85. There's nothing sinister about it. There's nothing wild about it. My business partner, Adam, who's in the chat, shout out to Adam, he was also born in the year 85, and he was born 85 days after me. And I met him after I numbered that on my channel. Okay? Well, look at the phrase, the flood. The flood equals 85, the year I was born. And the flood that took out my basement happened at age 40. So think about this. The guy who has the website that helps teach biblical numerology, I mean, I have a Bible search with Gematria all up in here. His house gets flooded right after he turns 40 years old. 40 days 40 nights, the flood in the book of Genesis? Come on, guys. Wake up a little bit. That's pretty crazy. Now, if you look at my precise age, I was 40 years and 67 days old when this flood destroyed my home. I shouldn't say destroyed. Again, it's being repaired. I will be living there again. But this number, 467, was a number in the decode I made. Check out how this race car driver, Robbie Brewer, who died the same night as the flood, was born exactly 467 lunar phases after Bob Uecker. And if you saw my video on Bob Uecker, like, that was a serious death to me. I'm not kidding when I say that Bob Uecker is probably the closest thing I had to a grandfather. And that may sound totally ridiculous to somebody who doesn't live in Milwaukee and doesn't follow sports. But, you know, I never met either of my grandfathers. I didn't know either of them growing up. My mom never even met her father on her side. And my childhood was often spent either at the stadium or in the basement of my house listening to Bob Uecker call the Brewer game. So I got emotional during my video in January on that. 467 is also the 91st prime number. And look at the gematria of Milwaukee and Wisconsin. 910, each of these words in standard English gematria. Robbie Brewer died 9 months and 10 days after his birthday. Bob Uecker died 10 days before his 91st birthday. Of course, these are also connected to 9/11, which we'll get into in a little bit. And in my post here, I just kind of highlight why I was discussing a flood riddle with Milwaukee before it actually occurred. Everything's laid out right here, as I discussed in the videos I've made. So we'll get more into the numbers in a second. I just want to point out, my sister-in-law was gracious enough to put up a GoFundMe to help me deal with the costs of the reconstruction of my basement. Now, less than 24 hours after I made my insurance claim, I was denied by American Family Insurance, which, by the way, happens to be the same company that the Milwaukee Brewers ballpark is named after, American Family Field. Well, I won't be visiting that stadium anytime soon, because that's the company that denied my insurance claim and essentially put me in the red. And, you know, again, it's a significant setback. All of my checking, all of my savings, most of the money in the business that we use to pay our bills for Gematrinator, the car insurance payout that I'm getting because my car was destroyed in this flood as well, and then a huge chunk of my retirement fund that I built up in my 8 years at General Electric. All of that is going into the rebuild of my house. And no, this amount here is not going to cover that. However, it is a big dent. And I could not feel more gracious about the help I'm receiving through this page. If you guys have followed my channel for a long time, you know that I am not one for charity. I began this work at the end of 2016, and I didn't ask for money until 2022, when I first relaunched the website as a product to sell, right? So people can now subscribe and get additional tools that weren't previously available. I never felt comfortable asking for money just because I was talking about numerology. It wasn't until I had something to sell where I did that. That was 6 years of work I put into this. So for me to ask for anything is very, very difficult. It's kind of why I waited a couple weeks to do this video, because, you know, I have a hard enough time talking about myself, but to do so at my lowest point was even more of a chore. So again, if you've already reached out and helped, I cannot thank you enough. This money is making a difference. It's essentially making it so I'm not completely busted ass broke once everything comes back. But it's still the case that everything I've worked for over the past few years after I quit my job with GE in corporate America I've lost. This has got to go back into the rebuilding of my house. And it's still the smartest financial decision for me to make. Just based on how much house prices have gone up since I bought this house in 2017. So I only snapped a couple pictures because I was in full out panic mode during this flood. I was convinced that this water was going to rise and take over my main floor. So, I was actually upstairs in my attic, like planning how to get myself and my cats out in a canoe. That's where my mind was at. And there are a few more pictures on here. I guess they're probably better for my blog. As kind of a comedic part of this whole flood is that when I first woke up, there was actually a flood warning that I got on my phone at about 1:30 a.m. perhaps. And I turned the alert off and I just rolled over and went back to sleep because I'm like, well, I can't do anything about that. Sucks for those people, right? But then about a half hour or so later, I woke up and it sounded like I was in a boat cabin. But I was also half asleep, so I didn't really grasp the reality of what was happening. Well, then my house started to make a loud creaking sound, and at first I thought it was a tree falling over. Now, the reason I thought that is because 4 years ago, on the exact same date as the flood this year, August 10th, we had a windstorm called a Derrico. And yeah, this is kind of weird because my name is Derek, and I had never heard of a Derrico until this happened. But check this out. So in Iowa, on August 10th, the same date as the flooding in Milwaukee, there was a powerful windstorm that destroyed a ton of crops in Iowa, devastated many communities, in fact. Well, exactly 1 year later, on August 10th, I had a windstorm in my neighborhood that knocked over like 10 to 20% of the trees in the neighborhood of West Allis where I live. And I made this post back in 2021 because it was connected to the release of Dan Barrett's book, The Synchronistic. Dan Barrett, another brilliant Gematria researcher, one of the two guys that I learned Gematria from when I started this in 2016. He released his book on August 6th, 4 days before the windstorm on the 10th of August, or 10/8. And windstorm equals 108. And then exactly 4 years later, after the windstorm, we get hit with the floods on the same day. So anyway, the comedic part I was going to talk about earlier is that I heard a loud creaking in my house, and I thought it was a tree coming down, but then I heard a huge bang. And my first instinct was that a car hit the house. It was that loud and staggering. So I jumped out of bed. I saw that a car did not hit the house. And I ran downstairs, and the water was already almost up to my knees. Now, I didn't see it at the time, but my basement wall had collapsed on the other side of the partition and was just filling up with water at a rapid pace. So I actually got on the phone with the emergency plumbing company, having no idea what was going on yet. And I'm sitting there on hold. And as I'm on hold, I look out the window to see what's going on with the rain. And this is what I saw. 3 feet of water on my street. And it was approaching the main floor of our homes. Now, the homes across the street from me are a little bit higher set than mine. So I actually had water that would have gotten into my main floor. But I built this ghetto blockade of paper towels and bath towels underneath and to the side of my screen door, and then I closed the main door, put a couch in front of the door, and it actually worked. I did not get water in my main floor, which was my prayer answered, honestly. Because once I saw this, I was like, oh, crap. I mean, you got to understand, we've never seen any water on the street at all before in the 8 years I've lived there. I have neighbors that have lived there for over 30 years. They've never seen any water on the street at all. It literally took 14 inches of rainfall in 6 hours for this to occur. Now, let's look at the radar from that night and kind of go minute by minute to explore the absolute absurdity of what occurred in Milwaukee. So on Saturday night, I had made a Gematria video earlier that day, and I kind of decided to take the rest of the day off because I had been busy the last few days, and I just kind of wanted to relax and, watch a Brewer game. I still enjoy baseball. It's the sport I played growing up. I've been a Brewer fan since birth. You're not going to be able to pull it out of me, no matter how much you talk about, rigging and numerology and all that. So I was just enjoying the Brewer game, which started around, I think it was 6 o'clock that night. And you see around 6 o'clock, there was really nothing going on for storms, right? But there was an immense amount of lightning. And because there was so much lightning, I was paying really close attention to the radar. So yeah, the Brewer game's going on. It's 6:40 p.m. on Saturday. And look at how empty this is. There's nothing going on. Just clouds and lightning, nothing. Well, then, over the next hour, storms begin rapidly developing, and you'll notice all of these storms continue to develop in the same area. So look at this. We go from 7:28 p.m., there's almost no rain, and then 15 minutes later, there's a thick cell of red storms over our area. And I'm in West Dallas, which is in this big loop here in Milwaukee, where the mouse is. So these storms start popping up out of nowhere. And after the first line missed my house, then we get hit by these for the next couple hours. And I'm watching the radar like, what is going on? Where is this coming from? And you'll see at around 9:30, the Brewer game had ended by this point. And it appeared as if the storms were over, from my perspective. So around 9:30, 10 o'clock, I'm not even looking at the radar anymore. Because I'm like, well, that's the worst of it. I mean, that was a crazy, 2 hours there, or hour and a half, but it's over, thank God. But then it just keeps happening, guys. Look at this. Look at this. I mean, you go from 9:58 to 10:13, another 15 minutes, and look at all these storms that have developed. Down here by in this big chunk of land. In 15 minutes. Look at that. I mean, am I supposed to believe this is nature? It doesn't appear like nature. I've lived here virtually my entire life. I've seen all kinds of rainstorms. Never have I experienced anything close to this. And it just kept coming, man. Just when you thought it was over. I mean, we're now going on about 2 extra hours after the initial 2 hours. I'm asleep at this point. I have no idea what's going on outside. And by the time I woke up around 2 a.m., I looked at the radar because outdoors, it kept coming down in sheets. Wave after wave. It was hitting hard. And I would look at the radar and it would look like it was all over. And then I would look outside and more storms kept popping up. Look at this. So this is around the time I woke up, 2:10. And more storms developing, more and more and more. So I'm looking outside like, well, I am literally going to have to be rescued from my own house. And again, 2:58, there's another patch. So I think you guys get the point here. If you want a good laugh, try and listen to these meteorologists explain what happened. They start making up new terms. They start inventing new ideas to help explain away what's going on with our weather. Again, it's either unnatural or it's supernatural, but it's still unlike anything I had ever seen before. 14 inches of rain in 6 to 8 hours. It is absolutely ungodly. So just real quick, a couple pictures of my basement wall. All the earth underneath my driveway essentially emptied into my basement. All my appliances are destroyed. And again, insurance covered nothing. Now, just to quickly explain that part of it, I do not live in a floodplain. Nobody I know in my neighborhood has flood insurance because, again, we've never seen any hint of flooding in the area. And if I wanted to get flood insurance, I would be paying 130% more than I currently am for home insurance. So, again, nobody in the neighborhood had it. Everyone is essentially facing the same struggles. Now, I mean, my struggles are certainly worse than average. From what I read, there was upwards of about 24 houses in West Allis that had the foundation destroyed or the basement collapse, with mine being one of them. So, I bought a 100-year-old house, and I guess that's part of the gamble, right? But again, a huge thank you and God bless to everybody who has pitched in to have so many people, family, friends, and especially strangers open their pocketbooks to help me at my absolute worst time has been very humbling, and it's definitely improving my perspective on the world at large. So down in the links in the description below, you'll find a link to my GoFundMe. You'll also find links to other ways to support. You can become a member on gematrinator.com. It's a monthly fee that varies based on how many tools you want. That'll, of course, help me. We're also selling hoodies still. Get yourself one of these high-quality hoodies. That would help. There's other links for PayPal and whatever, but again, I've never been one to ask for money, but I kind of have to at this point, so that's where I stand. I guess with that out of the way and my own personal story of what happened, then we'll talk about the rest of this numerology. And sorry, I've been ignoring the chat because I've just been going hard on this decode here. And just saying, just to kind of double down on what people are saying, well, yeah, absolutely, God is real. And, whether or not this storm is manufactured, again, to me, it's irrelevant because this was an experience my soul was destined to have during this incarnation. And if there is weather manipulation at play by man, then it's something that God has allowed for whatever reason. The one thing I can take some solace in is that there will never be a date like this again for Milwaukee as long as I'm alive. I hope. Maybe not until the year 81, but, I would turn 96 that year. I don't think I'll still be around, so. And yeah, definitely turning to Jesus is good. Again, if someone like me can say that after having endured so much loss the past couple of weeks, I hope that it can inspire some of you to do the same as well. There's a lot of disagreements out there about who or what Jesus truly was, but he was the light, he was the truth. And no matter what you believe about his spiritual entity or his godliness, he was here to show us how we can live and how our own minds essentially break the chains and allow us to be free. So just a little bit more about this flood. It happened on a date with 63 numerology, which is the gematria of Uecker. Bob Uecker is also 630, like the name George. And this is, of course, a number of Major League Baseball. Bob Uecker was the announcer in the movie Major League, which shares 63 gematria with Major League Baseball. And if you look at how old Uecker would have been for the flood, it matches his ordinal gematria. Also think about how the rain began on August 9th, written 8-9 or 9-8. Flash flood equals 98, like Milwaukee Brewers. The name Uecker equals 89. So does the month of August. And this is important because Bob Uecker's father's name was August. And then we get these floods in the month of August connected to Bob Uecker. Pete Alonso's full name also sums to 89. He's the one who tied the Mets record for home runs during this game, and he was born during Lunation 890. And another big thing about this Brewers win streak is that because the Brewers won 12 games in a row, everybody in the city got free George Webb burgers. And notice how George Webb and George Webb burgers both equal 89. Now, George Webb is a local diner with, I think, 23 locations in the Milwaukee area. And whenever the Brewers win 12 straight, they give free burgers to anybody who shows up. And the fact that this restaurant's name is George Webb is important because Bob Uecker's middle name is George. So the Brewers won 12 straight. And think about how the flooding occurred during a game against the Mets, which equals 12. Remember, there's 12 months in a year. Month named for moon. And in Latin, the moon's name is Luna, which equals 12. Now, when the Brewers won their 12th straight game, not only did they do so with 12 runs, they also had 12 hits, and they gave up 12 hits to the Pirates. The 12th prime number is 37, which matches Milwaukee, Brewer, Bob Uecker, and Burger. And the date on which the burgers were distributed was a date with 37 numerology. Now, in regards to this George connection between Uecker and George Webb, again, Uecker with that middle name, the name George has matching 57 Gematria with moon. And of course, the moon has the 57-degree range of declination. Well, the year 57 is the only year that Milwaukee won the World Series, back when they were the Braves. The Milwaukee Braves won in 57. The 57th prime number is 269. And when this flood occurred in Milwaukee, it was on the date of a full moon. And check out the lunation number. 1,269. Every new moon since January of 1923 has been numbered. And this flooding occurred during a full moon that connects back to the number 57. And of course, Brewers matches the moon in Gematria. So does Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So does Robert George Uecker. The name Uecker. All of this matches the moon, guys. I've been saying this for years. The Brewers are the ultimate moon team. And then we get free burgers. And Burgers has the exact same Gematria as Brewers and the moon. And the team that the Brewers were playing was the Mets. Mets and New York Mets both equal moon. And you can even take this a step further. Because if you look at the incorporation date for the city of Milwaukee, all the way back in 1846, we find that the city of Milwaukee was 2,220 lunar phases old. Well, the flood happened on the date, or the 222nd day of the year. Of course, it was 22 months and 2 days after the Skull and Bones anniversary of Yale. That's a whole other story. But this date also leaves 143 days on the calendar. And whether you write out Milwaukee or Uecker, they both equal 143. But here's another fascinating thing I want to share with you. This all connects back to the ancient flood myth that appears to have originated in Mesopotamia and specifically the Sumerian culture. Now, earlier I mentioned the flood in the book of Genesis and how it's connected to Noah. 40 days and 40 nights. Well, the first night after my house was flooded at the age of 40, I stayed with my brother and his son, which means I shared a house with my nephew Noah, right? Again, I wouldn't make this up. It's so ridiculous. But I have the flood, and then I move in for one night with Noah. Noah, named after the biblical character. Anyway, I want to talk about this Epic of Gilgamesh, right? And again, this is a Sumerian text originally. Now, on my calculator, there's something called Sumerian Gematria. And it's perfect, right? Because Sumerian multiplies the alphabetic order by 6. This is said to be the cipher that reveals the number of the beast. And look at how the city of Milwaukee is a supermatch with the word Sumerian. See how Sumerian equals 600? The Sumerian cipher multiplies by 6. But Sumerian and Milwaukee have the same gematria, 137 and 53. And the Sumerian tale is called the Epic of Gilgamesh. And look at the gematria of Epic of Gilgamesh. 810. Like August 10th, the date of the flood. Also notice the 81, which matches Milwaukee, Wisconsin down here. Also look at the 135 in the alphabetic order. 135 is the Sumerian gematria of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And that's on top of the fact that the date matched perfectly. Get it? There's a lot more moon connections with Bob Uecker here that I pointed out in my post. Again, all of these posts are linked down below in the description. But one thing I wanted to point out as well is that this is the first time that the Brewers won 12 straight games in the regular season since the year 87, when they started the season 13-0. Well, after they won 12 straight games that year, they would then go on to lose 12 straight games. Now, this was all in the year 87. And 87 is the gematria of the number 12. 12 also has matching gematria with Milwaukee Brewers and Major League Baseball. Also, the deluge equals 87. So does Noah's Ark. Important elements of the ancient flood myth. But is it a flood myth? I don't know if it's a myth anymore, guys. I mean, this stuff literally happened to me, the guy teaching biblical numerology. Furthermore, the flood occurred on a date with 27 numerology. And look at the reduction value of deluge, 27 forwards, 27 backwards. Epic of Gilgamesh, 270. Gilgamesh, 207. And not only did this date have 18 numerology, but it was also the 10th of August, like deluge, 108. The 10th of August. I did another post on Christian Yelich because when the Brewers won their franchise record-tying 13th consecutive game last week, the team captain, Christian Yelich, was using a special Bob Uecker bat. And with the Bob Uecker bat, he hit 2 home runs and went 4 for 4. Which is just crazy, right? And he used that bat 8 months and 10 days after his birthday, just like the date of the flood. Just like Epic of Gilgamesh, 810 and 81. Christian Yelich has a lot of strong numerical connections to Bob Uecker. They were born the 433rd prime number of weeks apart. This game with the Bob Uecker bat was against the Cincinnati Reds, which equals 433. These were also the same digits in Uecker's age when the flood started. Yelich's full name also has those digits. And when the flood hit Wisconsin, Yelich's age matched the Gematria of Wisconsin. And this even goes further. His full name is 250, like Flood 25. Now, I guess I'm not going to get into it because I kind of want to wrap this video up soon. But if you read my blog posts, you'll find out that there is a deep riddle here connected to another guy named Robbie Brewer. Because earlier, I talked about the race car driver, Robbie Brewer, who died as these floods were developing. Well, when you look up Robert Brewer, you actually end up finding this guy on Wikipedia. And right away, I noticed his birthday because his birthday is the same date that Milwaukee was founded, January 31st. So this dude was born exactly 78 years after the founding of Milwaukee. And 78 is the 12th triangular number, the number I just talked about. And his name, Robert, equals 78. And the reason he's famous is because his story was featured on a show called Band of Brothers, which equals 78. And Band of Brothers has the initials B-O-B, like Bob. And there's a whole bunch more here. Robert Brewer, the soldier, was 9 years and 11 months, or 119 months old when Bob Uecker was born. Again, Uecker had all of these connections to 9/11 when he died. On January 16th, which is an upside-down 9/11, it was all synced up to Mario Mendoza, which is a 116. The race car driver died a span of 9 months and 11 days after his birthday. And the soldier, Robert Brewer, would have been 101 years and 190 days old. When you measure from the deaths of Bob Uecker and Robbie Brewer, you get the digits 119 to the death date of Robert Brewer. And Robbie Brewer dies in Bowman Gray, 119, 11 weeks and 6 days before his birthday. All connecting back to the biblical flood tale of Noah, which is 119. And the flooding in Milwaukee was even 2,911 days after the total eclipse in 2017 that passed over the United States. The Brewers' nickname is Brew Crew, which also equals 119. So after Christian Yelich leads the Brewers to their 13th straight win, in the next game, the Brewers break a franchise record with their 14th straight win. And then, of course, they promptly lost because the words dead and end both equal 14. But what are the odds that the game-winning home run to win their 14th straight game was hit by number 14? Pretty strange, right? Well, the Brewers were playing the Cincinnati Reds in that game. And this year, the Cincinnati Reds are wearing the number 14 on every single one of their jerseys. See this? They're wearing a number 14 patch. This is because Pete Rose died at the end of last season, and he wore number 14. And don't forget, the Mets-Brewers playoff game last year that I talked about earlier, this was all synced up to Pete Rose. Because when the moon turned rosy red on Pi Day, Pete Alonso, who hit these heroic home runs, had the pi digits in his age. And I talked about pi and the Brewers in my last super stream towards the end. So this is, again, it's more than I could possibly put into one digestible video. But what struck me about this is I was talking to my buddy Cody over at Decoding with Cody about this, and he pointed out that on the same night that Monasterio hit his game-winning home run, a wrestler named Dominic Mysterio was wrestling in the main event for the AAA championship, right? So Andrew Monasterio So he has this game-winning home run as AAA Mania, this Mexican wrestling promotion, is unfolding. And the main event is Dominic Mysterio. Mysterio, Monasterio. Pretty crazy, right? And you look at Andrew Monasterio and discover his name matches the date that this all happened. The 16th of August, 16/8. Which matches his common name, his last name. He hit a 3-run homer off of La Sorsa, which both equal 168. But of course, these numbers connect to New York City, New York, which has a double 168. And Monasterio was born in the year 97. Well, so was Dominic Mysterio, also born in 1997. And 1997 is the Latin value of New York City. And again, the Floods broke out while the Brewers were playing the Mets from New York City. So Monasterio has a lot of connections to everything I discussed. Again, all of these posts are linked below. A beautiful 9/11 riddle here. It was 116 weeks after his debut. The pitcher he hit the home run off of was born on the 119th day, matching his name. Again, guys, I hope you kind of realize why I'm a little bit exhausted from this video. Again, this is one that I kind of had a hard time digging up the energy to do in the first place, given how personally the floods affected me. But again, the good news is I'm okay. All my cats are safe. I have a very gracious, good friend that I met through this work, who's allowed me to stay in his home while my basement gets repaired. So, all things considered, I do feel blessed. There's people out there who have it worse. I guess as far as the financial part goes, FEMA was in town this week, and they're in the process of determining whether or not they're going to be giving us federal aid. Ultimately, it barely matters. I mean, even if I do get like a big FEMA payout, we're talking like 5, maybe 10% of the total costs that I'll be eating for everything that's been going on. But, on the other hand, this is kind of forcing me to rethink, how I'm treating the few finances that I have left after all this. So hopefully this is the beginning of a new chapter and something better. I'm definitely going to be working hard to expand what we're doing on the website. For some of you who have seen my videos recently, I've been talking about a new piece of software that should be on the website within the next month or two. Of course, everything that's been going on has kind of put a little damper on that and delayed it a little bit, but I think by the end of the year, we're going to be, talking about turning the page on the next level of decoding once again as we start to pull astrology and some of these other significant elements in. So, shout out to everybody who made it, whether, once again, you're watching live or checking it out archived. Thanks again for all the love and support that you've given throughout the years. I remain committed to this craft, exploring how everything in this universe manifests by the same numerical codes stamped on the language that we speak. Because this to me speaks to the grand connection that we all have to the human source that our human ego continuously attempts to separate us from. But on a level of consciousness, you and I are all the same. We just have different bodies, different experiences, egos with different strengths. But ultimately, this universe is far more connected, godly, and magical than anyone could ever really imagine. And all we're trying to do is just hammer the evidence home. Everyone I've shown this Milwaukee, Wisconsin sync with in connection with the date of the flood, there hasn't been a single person I've shown this to who wasn't blown away by it. And it really is one of the most amazing things, the fact that the floods match the date of our Gematria perfectly. So with all that, guys, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Again, everything I talked about in this video linked down below in the description, including my predictions, essentially, that there was a flood narrative for the city of Milwaukee, but little did I know it would cause some of my own destruction. You know, it's like, hey, it's kind of like the universe smacking me in the face, like, hey, you want to be right about predicting the future? You want to be right about, you know, your little numerical clues? Well, you know, you always wanted lakefront property, and now I'm bringing the lakefront to you, is, I think what the big guy upstairs was kind of telling me with all that. All right, everybody. Thanks again for tuning in. Peace, love, God bless, and we'll talk to you next time. See ya.